Hey everyone, it's Justin with a KTOD video today focused on learning from your mistakes. How can we take the punts, the mistakes that we make in tournaments, and actually learn and grow from them? So today I'm going to be talking about some of the mistakes that I've made at a recent PQ and how I'm using those mistakes to improve at competitive SWU. Um, this is actually a picture of me from my math classroom from about 4 or 5 years ago. My calculus students, I would always tell them, hey, if you got a question wrong, if you got a low score on an assignment or homework or quiz, take that assignment and look at it, right? Analyze it. See what your thought process was in the moment, tie it into the right answer, see how to bridge that gap, right? Look at all the information that a mistake could give you and learn from it and grow from it. So I'm going to take that principle and share it with you today in the context of competitive SWU. So let's jump right in, and I want to start with a really important thing that I think all of us are looking at, which is let's look at what like around us there's winning, right? People are doing very, very well. So I look at this and I say my teammates are crushing it, right? Um, Shout out to Wu for just winning a PQ. Guess who was in the finals? Alex. He's another great player. They're consistently doing great. Why are they winning? Right? And there might be that internal side of you that says, why am I not winning? Right? Like I'm following what I think is a sequence and it's just not paying off. So you see, Stevie got top 8 in Denver. We see two guys from our group, but this picture just is tons of winning, tons of sort of performance, not making mistakes in big moments, and crushing it. Right. So what's sort of holding you back if you're at a tournament and you're almost there, but then you have that last round you lose, or you throw a game away. What's preventing you from being on this slide deck, right? What's preventing you from that winning picture, that top 8 picture, that champion picture? You see Ophir Wu with the champion mat. So um, I want to first look at this is the goal, right? We want to be here. So how do we get from a spot where we're not quite good enough? I haven't won a tournament, and that's my own internal thought process right now. How do I get from where I am now to here? So what mistakes am I making that the people on this slide are not making, right? And it's, obviously people can have a hot tournament and you could win based on that, but you're seeing some of the same faces at the top consistently, right? You're seeing Alex, I think he's won 3 or 4 PQs. He has, 8 or 9 top 8s, could be more. Um, John Todd is consistently at the top of the table. Mike Gem, Bobby Sapper, all this whole crew consistently winning. What are they doing? How are they eliminating mistakes? How are they playing so cleanly from week to week? And how do we learn from that based upon what we're not doing, right? So I want to talk about some of the mistakes that I see myself making. So these are, I'd say the type of mistakes that we make, but these are things that I've identified internally as ways that I want to improve. So number one is just not practicing enough, not gaming with intentional games. So you might be playing um, sort of a whole bunch of games. It could be through a couple different avenues. But if those games aren't intentional, you're not really practicing against good opponents, and you're not really thinking about like sideboard, and you're not really thinking about like the actual like importance of it, and your practice is just sort of clicking through something or playing something, it's not going to necessarily improve you. So you want intentional practice. I don't do it enough. Some of the other guys on my team that you saw in that previous slide are practicing a lot more than me, right? So if you're not in the trenches practicing, that's a mistake you can make before you even enter a tournament. So that's sort of step zero, right? Play more, but don't just play more without a purpose. Play with good people, play with and testing a matchup that you think you're going to see, play with specific sequences, talk about those sequences and items like that. Um, so okay, we can all practice more. We can all say, hey, we need to get better games before a tournament. So let's set that one aside for now. How do you avoid straight punts? Those are mistakes that we made. At the recent PQ that I played in, round two, game one, I had won round one, was feeling pretty good, just completely punted um, on just sort of a brain meltdown in the moment, right? Played a card, should have played the other card in my hand, lost that game because of it. then lost the second game in short order. How do you sort of navigate just throwing a game away? Well, I think there's a couple things there. One is ties into that practice conversation, right? The more you practice, the less you're going to make these punts because you've experienced the repercussions in those informative testing sessions, right? So if I've practiced, and this is actually something going back to my students, I would always want to do a lot of practice tests, right? If we were looking at getting ready for the AP exam, I wanted to have a practice test. So one of the things I talked to my school principal about is, hey, students are going to maybe make mistakes in the context of that high pressure environment. I'd rather practice that environment, have those mistakes early on the practice, so that when the real thing comes around, they could do very well. So in order to avoid these sort of simple punts, mistakes, sort of the ones where you just completely throw something away, that ties to the practice. So if you want to get better there, just practice more. And then what'll happen is you'll punt in the practice games and you'll say, oh, right, that's something now goes into the memory banks. Not going to do that again. In this game, and I think in many games, but in this game, sequencing is something that I've been trying to get better at and learn and document internally. I think flip turn mechanics are really, really interesting. And learning from a specific matchup analysis, the deck I'm playing and the decks that I'm very likely to see, especially as we're seeing the meta more defined. I want to have some important notes about sequencing. So I watched, shout out to the crew with the Data Vault Sabine. They had a great video, the Nordic guys, and they talked about delaying the flip with Sabine, taking multiple actions, playing two cost units for a resource turn with Sabine so you can delay the flip, and that was exceptionally good in a lot of matchups, and how that would change the sequencing of, if you flip the Sabine and then they do something, you're kind of pinched because now you're going to have to play your things and they'll be able to claim and take the initiative. But if you sequenced it the other way, it was very beneficial for you. So learning and thinking through your sequences. I lost the game at the PQ because of just feeling uncomfortable on a Kira versus Sabine flip. I didn't necessarily I was trying to think it through in the moment, but I didn't have the preparation in terms of the mental energy there, and sort of seeing, okay, there's a Sentinel, there's a Kira, I'm trying to play around Overwhelming Barrage, and just making sure that I sort of sequenced right. I know that I didn't do it right, and kind of going back in that sequence and doing some analysis, which we'll talk a little bit about later on. In terms of learning from mistakes, oftentimes we over-focus on the mistakes that maybe cost us a game. I started my video with that, right? I'm saying, hey, I punted and it cost me a game in round 2. I remember that mistake. My final winning in round, I made some really bad lines. I'm going to talk about those towards the end of this video, and those sort of stay with you a little bit, right? Well, the mistakes that you make and you still win, they dissipate more, right? You realize, oh man, I kind of got away with one there, and you still win, so it's no big deal. I think you should actually, analyze those just as much as you're analyzing the other mistakes that maybe sting a little bit more. I had a situation in the PQ where I won a match where I lost game 2 when I basically was dead to a surprise strike no matter what, was not dead to an overwhelming barrage, was able to sort of get a little greedy when I didn't have to, and then died to the overwhelming barrage. So I could have insulated myself. I won game 3. And that mistake doesn't sting as much, but I should still look at that and say, wait a second, why was I being greedy in that situation? That was actually wrong. The way the action sequenced after that, I actually couldn't really lose to any card in the opponent's deck. Instead, I gave them an opportunity to have a card to win, and they had it. Going a little bit back to the practicing concept is matchup mistakes, right? There are very common matchups. If you're thinking about Sabine, Kira, Han 2, some of like the Ray Data Vault things, you're seeing now common matchup sequencing, right? I think about the Sabine mirror match where, there's a couple different mistakes you can make within a matchup. Well, there's a lot, but a couple sort of common ones is just what unit you want to resource/play if you have the option of sort of multiple units, right? So in the Sabine match, understanding that, Battlefield Marine kind of trumps all for your turn one plays, but just understanding like, hey, if you just play a Sabine unit on resource one, especially when you don't have the initiative, that's just a really, really bad play. And you probably should mulligan and, understand those concepts of like when you should trade, when you should attack. And these are very hard conversations sometimes. And some of them don't necessarily have consistent answers where you could, write it down against Sabine, you need to do X. But I think getting practice or sort of understanding how the matchups might kind of go from turn one onward can help you sort of understand how the matchup, what you should be doing inside of that matchup. So again, the practice makes perfect here, but understanding what your role is. There's a really great magic concept of like who's the beatdown and who's the control in a matchup in any game, so that you can take some of those principles to SWU, and I think that's really important. Bad sideboarding. I think people just aren't playing enough post-board games in practice. Our team, even though we've been really successful, I think we're not doing that enough. And, a lot of your games are going to be post-sideboard games. If you think about it, more games by definition will be post-sideboard than game one, but most people practice game one because they sort of, it's an easier concept, right? But you're always going to play at least one post-board game, and, oftentimes we'll be playing two. So it's important to understand like what matters, and then some cards that are oftentimes regulated to the sideboard, like when they are actually going to shine and when they're not. Card like Confiscate, I think of frequently. Like, some decks have obvious targets for Confiscate, but some a little bit less, right? Like a Kira deck. Do you want to bring in the Confiscates for their traders? Maybe, maybe not. So you really practice with the sideboarding, practice intentionally. Sort of matchup mistakes, but the last one is bad lines, right? Sort of understanding and rushing through something, just kind of doing a game mechanic and not thinking it through. And this is the one that I'm going to really focus on towards the end of this video, which is kind of not thinking through the repercussions, the consequences of how the game will go, right? I'm going to attack. Maybe I should have claimed. Let me think about that concept. Maybe I could trade 2 damage here to get 8 damage more the next turn, and actually think about the sequences and lines that you're going to do. So bad lines, sequencing mistakes, they're a little bit different. When I talk about sequencing, I'm really thinking about like order of play of your units and almost like in the early to mid game. But bad lines might just be sort of those big decisions you have to make towards the end of the game when you're trying to close it out. So I want to talk a little bit about my experience with a very specific sort of sequence bad line that I had at the recent PQ at Tabletop Games in Connecticut. The video is in the description. It was covered by McClunky Games. Shout out to McClunky. They are fantastic. Tim and Claire did a wonderful job. But I was matched up against Blue Tarkin in the final round. Very good player. Farm Boy is the screen name. At the last PQ in the same event, he top-8'd with Blue Tarkin. So he clearly knows what he's doing, played a really strong deck that was a little bit off meta, right? I don't have those lines memorized of what's happening. And, shout out to Farm Boy because he's playing a deck that can take 2 roles, right? It can play a blue-green villainy thing. Does it have Super Laser Blast? Does it have Avenger? Or it can also play, the sort of small units of like TIE Fighter, which we see on the screen. And you're as your opponent, you're kind of thinking like, how does this work? So this was round 7. If I won the match, I was in the top 8. If I lost, I was out. So pretty typical spot to kind of get your adrenaline flowing a little bit and what you want in a tournament, right? You want to be in those shoes. You want to be there. I lost 0-2. I got completely crushed. Shout out to Farm Boy for really just, completely dominating the match. I think it took about 12 minutes in total game time, maybe not even. I was Sabine, obviously, and, my top 8 dreams were dashed, and I could have easily had in my brain, and I went there for a little bit of, drew overwhelming barrage back-to-back games, completely decimated my board, lost because of that. No. The mistakes that I made caused me to lose the game, and great play from Farm Boy. So I think that's an important thing too. Sometimes your opponents will just play great and beat you, and he made zero mistakes, to my recollection, and played really, really well and won. But that doesn't change the fact that I could have done things better to maybe win one of these games, maybe win the match. Who knows? So I want to pinpoint a very specific situation. So I lost game one, and I also, I think, made a mistake there. It was a little bit more unclear. But this one stands out as sort of a play line mistake, where I just sort of went through the motions. And if I actually slowed down and thought about it, I think I had a line to win this game. So where we stand right now in the board is that I have, this is my action on resource 4. Sabine has not been flipped yet. The way that this game started out was, I ECL'd you can see the phase 3 guard. So basically the way this game went was I went Luke Skywalker, he went TIE Fighter. My first action on resource 2 was to Fleet Lieutenant to put in 5 damage. He went Phase Trooper, and then I ECL'd. And on his resource 4, he's going Iden and Experience Token and making that TIE Fighter very, very strong. So basically what's happened is it's my initiative. He's got 13 damage. I've got 10. Sabine has not been lifted. I didn't think the hand and the sequencing through enough. I have a Rebel Assault. I think I actually might have had 2 Rebel Assaults in my hand, and 4 Cause I believe in. 13 damage. I'm not doing a good enough job of actually going through each sequence and how it's going to work, right? My mind went to, I hope he doesn't have barrage in back-to-back games. So I lift up my Sabine, I attack his base, he obviously claims, and then he has the barrage and decimates my board, wins in short order. At this stage, I should have thought about the sequencing of the cards that he might have that could lose me the game, which is, I think, clearly overwhelming barrage, versus the cards, the sequence line that can potentially put me in a spot to win the game. So right after this, I took out my notebook and I wrote down what I should have done. So I sort of recognized, wait, there had to be a feeling here. So I want to sort of think about sequencing, and this is where, the math teacher me kicks in, although it didn't kick in during that match. If I claim here, and my first action, so just to kind of going back a little bit, if you look at, he's going to have 16 damage if I don't claim, in attack, and he would have the initiative versus 13 and having the Sabine not activated yet, which is actually, as I thought back on it, is actually an advantage. So what ended up happening was the following. I lifted Sabine, took him to 16. He overwhelming barraged, killed K2, which took him to 19, Fleet Lieutenant, and Sabine. I was left with a Luke Skywalker. My turn was like attack with Luke for a Rebel Assault, and then 4 Cause. He claims, wins on first action on resource 6. Didn't even lift his Tarkin. Played it really well, so he didn't have to worry about like a Poe, although I'd already used DCL. So what I should have done after instead was, and this is not just sort of like I should have done this because I lost. This is actually, hey, there was a correct line here that I didn't take because I didn't think it through. And that line was to claim right now, and then open Rebel Assault on my 2 3-power units. So Luke Skywalker and Fleet Lieutenant do 8 damage. So I would take him to 21. And then on his action, it's a little bit weird for him because he kind of has to deal with that K2 right away, and that K2 is either going to do 4 or it's going to do 3, and that Sabine's waiting in the wings. He can't damage it. And if he plays a Sentinel, I can just sort of attack with the K2 and do 3 damage. I've got 4 Cause, I've got Rebel Assault, I've got a few different avenues here. And what I could have done is put my opponent in a position where the cards that, I know that are in his deck, right? We're not talking about the Avenger right now. We're not talking about those sort of later game cards. We're really talking about an overwhelming barrage or potentially a Sentinel. I can take him to 21 with 4 Cause in hand, a K2 that he has to deal with. It's going to do 3 damage. And sort of all of the cards that might answer and be good for him, I could make not as strong, right? By giving him the initiative, that allowed his overwhelming barrage to have, kill 3 units. Whereas I could get 2 units into attack with just claiming. Again, take him to 21 and then have a K2 where if he overwhelming barrages that, it does 4 damage. I can lift up my Sabine. I can ping. I can do a whole bunch of things. He's now used his resources, so I have more information about sort of what I can do, right? So I could, kind of feel pretty confident that I can close out the game. The math on my end, I think would have worked out with For a Cause and the Rebel Assault and having the Sabine back, and just sort of the sequencing. So long story short, I could have went to my friends and said, yeah, I drew Barrage, you won, and kind of been salty about it. And that certainly was an emotional experience that I had and said, yeah, darn it, like in the moment. But then I looked at myself and I said, no, a lot of that was actually poor sequencing on my end, right? And, I'm down a game on the play, Tarkin, game 3, could have certainly lost still. My opponent's trying to play their cards to win as well. Really good player, really competent. So not sort of saying, hey, it's all about me, but in terms of trying to get better as a player, it is all about you, right? You want to do the best you can to improve. So I actually took a lot of learning from this. My big learning was, let's actually think more about the repercussions of actions and what will happen if things sort of waterfall in a trajectory that I think could happen, right? Let's not just hope that they don't have a card. Let's spend some time thinking about, okay, if they have this card that's really good, is there a correct line? If they have this card that's really good, is there a correct line against me? If they have it and my lines still lose, just go, play in a manner that you're not playing around that card, right? But if they have a card that's incredibly good against me, and in this situation it was Overwhelming Barrage, where I basically said, if they have it, I lose, but if they don't, I win. And then I took that line and lost to the card, where there was an avenue where if they have it, I think I actually can maneuver this and still win. And if they don't have it, it's still really good, right? Like if he doesn't have the Overwhelming Barrage, I feel really comfortable where my position is as well. So it's sort of a win-win for me. And I decided to take an option that just basically lost on the spot to that specific card. So a lot of learning here. I think ultimately this will be good for me in my trajectory as a player. And I think it's important that we analyze these moments as we go through. So one of the things I did after the tournament, it's about an hour and a half drive home. I got home and I journaled, and I want to be intentional about my mistakes. So I kind of wrote down these things. I wanted to share these with you. I copied them from my notebook over to this slide deck. I mentioned that mistake in round 1 where I still won. I got greedy with a wrecker and kind of like said, okay. By greedy, basically what happened was I could have killed 2 units with the wrecker, but I decided to push the 5 damage. It was against Piet into the Piet to kill and do 5 more damage on the ECL wrecker. And then he had 2 units, which allowed his Overwhelming Barrage to also cause lethal. I could have actually just killed his 2 ground units. He would have had the option to barrage, but long story short, I think he was at like within a window of 7 damage. So I had him in check with like Rebel Assault and or the Wrecker living. So sort of threw that game away. So I wanted to sort of note that. You can see the sort of total punt I had in round 2 where I basically played a Chewbacca where I should have just played K2. There was no reason not to. The K2 was better in all instances. And then, No Glory, I guess No Glory would have been an instance where it was slightly worse, but there was just so many other avenues where Chewie would not have been as good as the K2. And I got punished for it and lost. That third line there about sort of the sequencing, that's actually something that I wanted to note of, like, I knew I didn't do it right. I don't know what was right, but I know that what I did wasn't. And I want to sort of have some mental structure there about what I could do better in that very common line of like, okay, Kira deck ramps, Sabine deck has some choices. There might be a Sentinel out. How do we actually navigate this? And I feel a lot more comfortable in that matchup after sort of analyzing this sequence. And then in game one, you saw on the last slide, I was down a game. And I'm still not totally sure if this was right. And this is something that happens too. It's like just because you lost on a line doesn't necessarily mean it is the wrong thing. It doesn't necessarily mean it was a mistake. So in that game one, I played an A-Wing. My opponent played an Inferno 4. I had Chewbacca and Darksaber in my hand. I felt pretty good about racing from that seat. But my opponent played Iden, and then on Resource 4 was able to use Tarkin's ability to. I was getting my attacks in, but basically I knew that those units weren't going to last. So the Chewie got taken out by the Inferno 4 with Iden on it and an experience token from Tarkin. And then I attacked with Darksaber Sabine and then got Overwhelming Barraged on Resource 5 and kind of completely dominated. So it's a chance that they actually should have attacked his units early, but there's a chance that, like, hey, in that situation, it was just a loss based upon, sort of. I still had it to take those because if I play a control deck, if I play a longer control game plan, I don't necessarily know where that game goes. So it's possible that the sequencing I took was correct, but it just didn't work out. And sometimes you do have to be aware of those as well. So what are the main takeaways here? I think one is that, whether you win or lose is irrelevant. You should be looking at all your mistakes. It's definitely easier to sort of analyze the mistakes that really cost you later in the tournament, later in the rounds. As we're talking about, like, the turn that you lose the game or win the game, that's the one that's sort of most appealing. It's the hardest, but also, like, sort of the most appealing to analyze. But there's other mistakes as well, and you want to look at all of them. This second line is, I think, do the math on anticipated actions and decisions. I think this, if you're a really good player, if you're an Alex or a Tada or a Bobby Sapphire, you're probably saying, like, duh. But I think it's important to be reminded of this, right? We could do it sometimes, but it's, you want to eat your vegetables. You want to actually go through this. I need to be better at this. And that's something that I'm looking at for the future of my play is, like, actually going through, okay, if they do that, I'm going to do this. And if they have this card that's really bad for me, here's my angle to how to beat it. Searching for your mistakes. As you can see, I kind of am modeling that in this video, right? I had my PQ. I searched for some. You saw on the last slide, I had round 1, round 2, round 7. Maybe there was possible I made a mistake in round 4 in a game. You want to be intentional about searching for those mistakes. I suppose you don't want to get, too overly obsessed with it, but I think you do want to look for, if you're losing, if you're feeling like you didn't play something right, internalize it and say, like, what could I have done better? This is something I didn't really touch upon, but, like, search for small mistakes, especially, early with what you're resourcing and what you're playing. I think some of those things, you can make a mistake that might not necessarily be like a math punt or a sequencing punt, but it actually is a punt on just, like, what card you played early in the game, right? Like, what card you resourced. You're playing the mirror and you resource a Rebel Assault. Obviously that's a huge punt, and it might not feel like it. You lose. Why'd I lose the game? They always crush me. And it's like, well, the mirror's all, that's one of the most important cards. So understanding your role and how that goes. And then I think the biggest thing of how to just improve is you want to internalize, you want to analyze, you want to look for ways to get better, but practice allows that to manifest itself in you. If you practice and you play and you're intentional about those reps, you're going to improve and you're going to be making less mistakes and you're going to get better as a player. So, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Just shout out to the community again for engaging these conversations, and I'll see you next time.